My family chose my brother over me. My mentor chose his reputation over my life. And 5 years ago, they watched me get dragged away in handcuffs. This is a family drama that turned into one of the most calculated revenge stories you'll ever hear. Because today, I walked back into their boardroom not to beg, but to fire them all. My name is Kennedy Sanders, and as I walked into the boardroom where my life fell apart 5 years ago, my old mentor didn't even recognize the woman he destroyed. He thought I was just another investor coming to save his sinking ship, but he had no idea I wasn't there to save it, I was there to take it. The smell of the room was exactly the same: old money, lemon polish, and stale coffee. The mahogany tables stretched out like a battlefield, the leather chairs positioned like thrones for the unworthy. At the head of the table sat Silas Vance. He looked older, more haggard, the stress of a plummeting stock price carving deep lines into his face. But that arrogant sneer was still there. It was the same sneer he wore when he told the police I had stolen $500,000 from the client fund. He didn't look up when I entered. He was too busy berating an assistant about the temperature of his water. To his right sat my brother, Austin. That was the cherry on top. Austin, the golden child, the one my parents adored, the one who took my spot at the company after I was disgraced. He was looking at his phone, completely checked out. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the silence settle. My heels didn't click. They thudded with a heavy, expensive authority that I didn't possess 5 years ago. Behind me stood my legal team, a phalanx of 3 sharks in Italian suits who cost more per hour than my father made in a year. Silas finally looked up. His eyes squinted. For a second, there was zero recognition, just annoyance that a woman was interrupting his tantrum. Then the gears turned. His eyes widened, then narrowed again, into a look of pure confusion. "Kennedy?" he asked, his voice rough. "Hello, Silas," I said. My voice was calm, unnaturally calm. It was the voice of someone holding a royal flush while their opponent went all in on a pair of 2s. "What on earth are you doing here?" Austin snapped, jumping up. He looked panic-stricken. "Security, how did she get past the front desk?" I walked forward, ignoring my brother, and pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table, the seat facing Silas. I sat down, folded my hands on the table, and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I was invited, Austin. In fact, I insisted on the meeting." Silas laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "You? You're the mystery investor representing the chaotic neutral acquisition group? Don't make me laugh, Kennedy. You're unhireable. You're a convicted felon. Did you break in here to beg for your old job back? Because I have to tell you, we don't hire thieves." The word hung in the air. Thieves. Let's go back to that word. Because to understand why I am sitting in this chair, wearing a suit that costs more than your car, you need to understand exactly what happened 5 years ago. You need to understand the hell you put me through. 5 years ago, I was the rising star of Vance Global. I was 24, hungry and brilliant. I worked 80-hour weeks. I missed birthdays, weddings, and funerals. I lived on caffeine and ambition. Silas was my idol. I looked at him as the father figure my own dad never was. My father was too busy doting on Austin to notice me. But Silas saw my potential. Or so I thought. I had discovered a discrepancy in the accounts. It was subtle, small siphoning of funds from high-yield accounts, masked as transaction fees. I brought it to Silas immediately, thinking I was saving the company. I remember the look on his face. He looked proud. He told me to leave the files with him, that he would handle it, that I was going to be a partner one day. 2 days later, internal security marched into my office. They didn't just fire me, they orchestrated a spectacle. They claimed the discrepancies were traced back to my login. They said I had fabricated the evidence to frame a senior partner. Silas stood there, shaking his head in mock disappointment, telling the police that he had tried to mentor me, tried to guide me, but my greed was too strong. I was arrested in the lobby. I was walked out in handcuffs in front of the entire staff. I saw the secretaries whispering, the junior analysts taking photos. I saw my career evaporate before I even made it to the squad car. The legal battle drained every cent I had. I avoided prison only because the evidence was circumstantial, and my lawyer, a public defender who was overworked but sharp, found a technicality in the digital chain of custody. But the damage was done. I had a record. I was branded an embezzler. My family was the final nail in the coffin. I remember the dinner after the charges were dropped. I went to my parents' house looking for comfort, looking for a place to hide. My mother wouldn't even look at me. My father sat at the head of the table, carving a roast, and said, "We always knew you were too aggressive, Kennedy. You never knew your place. Austin is taking a position at Vance Global next week. Silas is doing us a favor, cleaning up your mess. Try not to embarrass us further." That was the night Kennedy Sanders died. And the night something else was born. I moved into a studio apartment that smelled like mold and despair. I couldn't get a job in finance. No one would touch me. So I worked as a night janitor at a tech incubator. It was humiliating, but it gave me access. I cleaned the trash cans of geniuses who were terrible at business. I listened to their pitches while I mopped the floors. I saw brilliant ideas failing because the founders didn't understand capitalization tables or burn rates. I started leaving notes. One night, a developer named Jin was crying at his desk at 3 a.m. His code was perfect, but his pitch deck was a disaster. I sat down, put my mop aside, and rewrote his entire financial projection on a napkin. Jin raised $5 million 2 weeks later. He didn't care about my record. He cared that I made him rich. Jin was my first client. He brought me another, then another. I wasn't an employee. I was a ghost consultant. I took my fees in equity. I lived on ramen noodles and spite for 3 years, accumulating shares in startups that everyone else ignored. Then one of them hit. A fintech AI I had bet the farm on went public. Overnight, I went from the janitor with a criminal record to a woman worth 9 figures. But I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't go to Paris. I founded Valkyrie Ventures. We became the sharks that ate the sharks. We were aggressive, we were ruthless, and we were winning. But I never took my eyes off Vance Global. I watched Silas run the company into the ground. He was a dinosaur. He didn't understand the digital shift. He kept investing in dying industries, trying to prop up his old friends. The stock price started to bleed. Then it started to hemorrhage. I watched from the shadows as he panicked. He started looking for a buyout, a merger, anything to save his legacy. He was desperate. And that brings us back to the boardroom. Silas was still looking at me with that mixture of amusement and disdain. He tapped his pen on the table. "Look, Kennedy," he said, checking his watch. "It's a cute story. You cleaned up nice. I assume you married well. Or maybe you found a new scam. But we have a meeting with a major institutional investor in 5 minutes. You need to leave before I have security drag you out again. It would be a shame to ruin that dress." My lawyer, a man named Marcus, who had a jawline like a granite cliff, stepped forward and placed a single, thick document on the table. He slid it towards Silas. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice deep and resonating, "you are meeting with the major institutional investor. You're speaking to the majority shareholder of the Artemis Group." Silas froze. The Artemis Group was a shell company that had been aggressively buying up Vance Global debt and converting it to equity for the last 6 months. They were the ones holding the lifeline. He looked from the document to me. His face went pale. The blood drained out of him so fast he looked like a corpse. "No," Silas whispered. "That's impossible. It's a conglomerate." "Artemis is me," I said, leaning forward. "I own the shell companies. I own the debt, and as of this morning, when the market opened, I exercised my options. I pulled out my tablet and tapped the screen, projecting a pie chart onto the massive screen behind Silas. I own 51% of Vance Global, Silas. I don't need to interview for a job. I own the building." The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. Austin looked like he was going to be sick. He slumped back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "But why?" Silas stammered, his arrogance finally cracking, revealing the terrified old man underneath. "You did this to To save us? We can work together, Kennedy. I always knew you had spark. I can save you. I cut him off. A laugh escaped me, cold and sharp. I didn't buy this company to save it, Silas. I bought it to autopsy it. I signaled to Marcus again. He pulled a second document from his briefcase. This one was thicker. You see, when you own the company, you get access to everything. Every server, every archived email, every buried ledger. My forensic accountants have been inside your system remotely for the last 48 hours, ever since the acquisition triggered the data handover. I stood up and walked slowly toward the head of the table. Silas shrank back into his chair. We found it, Silas. We found the original transfer from 5 years ago. We found the emails between you and your offshore banker. We found the metadata that proves you logged into my terminal using an admin override code to make the transfers. You stole that money to pay off your gambling debts in Macau, didn't you? Silas was shaking now. Sweat beaded on his forehead. You can't prove that. That's ancient history. There is no statute of limitations on this level of corporate fraud when it involves crossing state lines and wire fraud, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. But that's not even the best part. You see, you didn't stop. You've been siphoning money from the pension funds to prop up the stock price for the last 2 years. That's not just theft, Silas. That's federal. Austin stood up, his voice cracking. Kennedy, please, think about the family. If you do this, if you expose him, the company collapses. My job, Dad's reputation. I turned to my brother, the golden child. Your job? I asked. Austin, you've been the VP of strategy for 3 years, and you haven't produced a single profitable strategy. You were a diversity hire, except the diversity was nepotism. And as for Dad's reputation, Dad stopped having a reputation the day he disowned his innocent daughter to suck up to a thief. I turned back to Silas. He was trying to stand up, trying to muster some dignity. I am the CEO of this company, he shouted, though his voice wavered. You can't just walk in here and... You are fired, I said. The words tasted like fine wine. Silas blinked. You can't. I just did. Effective immediately, for cause, which means no golden parachute, no severance package, no stock options. You leave with nothing. I nodded to the door. 2 men in dark suits entered. They weren't building security. They were federal agents. I had called them an hour ago. Silas Vance, one of the agents said, stepping forward, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The color left Silas's face completely. He looked at me, pleading now. Kennedy, please, I was your mentor. I taught you everything you know. You taught me that the world is cruel, I said, and you taught me that if you want justice, you have to buy it. Lesson learned. I watched as they handcuffed him, the man who had once terrified me, the man who held my life in his hands, looked small, pathetic. As they walked him out, he didn't look back. He just stared at the floor, broken. The room was silent again, except for Austin's heavy breathing. What happens to me? Austin asked, his voice trembling. I looked at him. I looked at the brother who never called, who never sent a birthday card, who watched me eat instant noodles while he drove a Porsche, bought with a salary he didn't earn. You're fired too, Austin. But Mom and Dad, tell them they can come visit you at the unemployment office, I said. Get your things. You have 10 minutes before I deactivate your key card. Austin fled the room. He didn't argue. He knew better. I was left alone in the boardroom. The sharks, my lawyers, sat quietly, waiting for instructions. I walked to the head of the table. Silas's chair was still warm. I stood behind it, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. For 5 years, I had dreamed of this moment. I thought it would feel like a fireworks display. I thought I would feel an explosion of joy. But standing there, looking out at the city that had once chewed me up and spit me out, I didn't feel joy. I felt peace, a cold, solid, unshakable peace. I sat down in the chair. It was comfortable. It fit me perfectly. Marcus cleared his throat. "What are your orders, Miss Sanders, regarding the company? The stock is going to tank when the news of the arrests breaks." "Let it tank," I said, spinning the chair to face them. "Strip it for parts, sell off the bad assets, keep the tech patents. We're going to rebrand. Vance Global is dead." "What are we calling the new entity?" he asked. I smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, the smile of a woman who had walked through fire and came out holding a torch. "Phoenix Dynamics," I said, "because we rise from the ashes." That evening, my phone blew up. 57 missed calls from my mother, 30 from my father, text messages ranging from begging to threatening. "How could you do this to your brother? You've destroyed the family name. You are a monster." I didn't block them. I wanted to see them. I read every single one while drinking a glass of vintage scotch in my new corner office. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed my father. He answered on the first ring. "Kennedy, you ungrateful, spiteful little witch, do you have any idea what you've done? Silas is in jail. Austin is crying in the living room. You have to fix this. Call the lawyers, drop the charges, give the company back." I listened to him scream for a full minute. I listened to the man who let me be dragged away in handcuffs without lifting a finger. "Are you done?" I asked. He sputtered. You owe us. We raised you." "You raised a survivor, Dad," I said. "You just bet on the wrong horse." "I'm writing you out of the will," he screamed. "You won't get a dime." I laughed. It was a rich, full sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Dad," I said, swirling the amber liquid in my glass, "I just bought a company for $400 million in cash. I don't need your money. In fact, looking at Austin's financial mismanagement, pretty soon you're going to need mine." I hung up the phone. I walked over to the window. Down below, the city lights were twinkling. Somewhere down there was the old apartment building where I used to cry myself to sleep. Somewhere down there was the janitor's closet where I planned my empire. I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't Kennedy the victim. I wasn't Kennedy the scapegoat. I was Kennedy Sanders, the owner. I turned back to the empty boardroom. The ghosts were gone. The fear was gone. I turned off the lights, leaving the room in darkness, save for the glow of the city. I had a lot of work to do tomorrow. I had to build a new empire on the bones of the old one. And for the first time in 5 years, I couldn't wait to get started. I walked out of the boardroom and I didn't look back. Not even once.